The day Patricia Simmons from the Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association marched onto my front lawn with a scowl that could curdle milk was the day my summer took an unexpected turn. I was 12 years old, with nothing but entrepreneurial spirit, a folding table, and a pitcher of my grandmother's secret recipe lemonade. "Excuse me, young man," she snapped, her highlighted bob haircut practically vibrating with indignation. "What do you think you're doing?" I looked up from where I was carefully arranging plastic cups on my little card table. The late June sun beat down on my neck, and I'd only been open for business for about 20 minutes. "Selling lemonade, madam," I replied, trying to sound as polite as my dad had taught me to be with adults. "Would you like a cup? It's only 50 cents. Patricia's eyes narrowed behind her designer sunglasses. "Do you have a permit for this operation?" She said the last word like I was running some kind of illegal gambling ring instead of a lemonade stand. "A permit?" I echoed, genuinely confused. I'd been setting up lemonade stands every summer since I was 8. No one had ever mentioned needing a permit before. "Yes, a permit. And I don't see any signage about health code compliance or ingredient listings." She pulled out her phone and started taking pictures of my modest setup. "This is a clear violation of Oakwood Estates HOA Regulations Section 7.3 regarding unauthorized commercial activities." I didn't know what to say. My dad had just moved us to Oakwood Estates in Somerville, South Carolina 3 months ago, after accepting a position at the local hospital. He was still at work, and I was just trying to make some pocket money. "I'm sorry, I didn't know," I stammered. Patricia wasn't interested in my apology. "I'll have to report this to the full board. Pack this up immediately or face a fine." With that, she marched back to her pristine white SUV parked at the curb and drove off. I sat there for a moment, stunned. Then I noticed my elderly neighbor, Mr. Murphy, watching from his porch across the street. He hobbled over, leaning heavily on his cane. "Don't mind Patricia," he said kindly. "She's been on the HOA board for 15 years and thinks she owns the neighborhood." He pulled out $1 from his wallet. "I'll take 2 cups, son." As I poured Mr. Murphy his lemonade, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let Patricia ruin my summer business before it even started. That evening, when my dad came home from his shift at the hospital, I told him about my encounter with Patricia, Dad Doctor. Michael Nelson, to his patients, looked exhausted after a 12-hour shift, but he listened attentively as we sat at our kitchen table. "She just came up and told you to shut down?" he asked, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. "No warning or anything?" "She said I needed a permit and something about Section 7.3 of the HOA rules," I replied. "Dad, can they really stop me from having a lemonade stand?" Dad sighed. "Marcus, I wish I could say no, but HOAs can make all kinds of rules about what happens in the neighborhood. When we bought this house, I signed an agreement to follow their regulations." He stood up and walked to the study, returning with a thick binder. "Let's look up this Section 7.3 she was talking about." We flipped through pages of densely printed text until we found it. "No commercial enterprise, business, or trade of any kind shall be conducted upon any residential lot without prior written approval from the board." "That seems a bit extreme to apply to a kid's lemonade stand," Dad muttered. "So I can't sell lemonade at all?" I asked, disappointed. Dad thought for a moment. "Tell you what, tomorrow's Saturday, so I'm off. Let's both go to the HOA office and see about getting you that permit she mentioned." The next morning, Dad and I walked the 3 blocks to the community clubhouse where the HOA kept its office. Patricia was there, along with 2 other board members, a balding man named George Wilson, and a stern-looking woman who introduced herself as Barbara Henderson, Doctor. "Nelson, we've been expecting you," Barbara said with a tight smile. "Patricia informed us about your son's enterprise." "Yes," my dad said pleasantly. "Marcus here would like to apply for whatever permit he needs to run his lemonade stand." Patricia's lips thinned. "I'm afraid that's not possible. Section 7.3 clearly states—" "I've read Section 7.3, my dad interrupted gently. "It says commercial enterprises need prior board approval. We're here to request that approval." George shuffled some papers. "Well, technically, yes, but we've never approved such a request before." "There's a first time for everything," Dad replied, his doctor's smile never wavering. "The regulation doesn't prohibit approval, it just requires it." Barbara and George exchanged glances. "There would need to be a formal application," Barbara said slowly, "with a processing fee of $150. My heart sank. My total profit last summer had been only $87, $150 for a child's lemonade stand, Dad asked, his smile fading. "That seems excessive." "Rules are rules," Patricia said smugly. "We can't make exceptions. Imagine if everyone wanted to run businesses from their homes." "We're talking about a 12-year-old selling cups of lemonade, not opening a factory," Dad countered. Barbara tapped her pen against the desk. "There's also the matter of health permits from the county, liability insurance requirements, and compliance with signage restrictions." I could tell my dad was getting frustrated, though he kept his voice calm. "Is there someone else we can appeal to? The full board, perhaps?" "The full board meets on the last Monday of the month," George said. "You're welcome to present your case then, but I should warn you that we rarely overturn decisions." As we walked home, I could see Dad was deep in thought. "Don't worry, Marcus," he said finally. "There are other ways to earn money this summer. Maybe Mrs. Bennett down the street needs help with her garden, or you could walk dogs." "But I like my lemonade stand," I protested. "All my friends back in Charlotte had them. No one ever complained." "I know, buddy. But this neighborhood is different. We agreed to follow their rules when we moved here." He put his arm around my shoulder. "Sometimes in life you have to pick your battles." I nodded, but inside I wasn't ready to give up. That afternoon, while Dad was napping after his long week, I decided to at least sell the lemonade I'd already made. I set up my stand at the edge of our driveway, technically on our property, but still visible from the sidewalk. Within minutes, I had my first customer, Lisa from next door, and her mom, Bethany Harris. They were out for a walk and stopped to buy 2 cups. "This is delicious," Bethany said after taking a sip. "Your own recipe, my grandmother's," I explained. "She added a little bit of lavender and honey." "Clever business location," Lisa observed with a grin. She was 14 and way cooler than me, but always nice. "Technically on private property, right?" I nodded. "The HOA lady said I couldn't sell on the front lawn, so..." Bethany frowned. "Patricia giving you trouble already?" "You've barely moved in." Before I could answer, a familiar white SUV pulled up and Patricia emerged like a storm cloud. "I see you're deliberately circumventing board directives," she called from the sidewalk. "This is still a violation." Bethany stepped forward. "Patricia, it's a lemonade stand." "He's not selling drugs." Patricia's face reddened. "Rules exist for a reason, Bethany. If we let one child break them, soon we'll have chaos. Imagine if every house had commercial activities." "Heaven forbid children show initiative," Bethany muttered. Patricia pulled out her phone. "I'm documenting this continued violation. The board will be issuing a formal warning to your father," she told me. "A second violation will result in a fine of $250. After she left, Bethany shook her head. "That woman needs a hobby that doesn't involve policing other people's lives." She pulled out her wallet and handed me a $5 bill. I'll take 4 more cups to go. My book club is meeting in an hour and they'll love this. By the time Dad woke up, I had made $23 and was just cleaning up. I told him about Patricia's second visit and the threat of a fine. Dad sighed. I'm sorry, Marcus. I think we need to respect their rules, even if we don't agree with them. He helped me bring in my supplies. Let's brainstorm some other summer activities, okay? That night, I couldn't sleep. It wasn't just about the lemonade stand anymore, it was the principle. Why should one grumpy lady get to decide what I could do with my summer? I thought about what Lisa had said about private property, and an idea began to form. Sunday morning, I called my best friend from my old neighborhood, Jake, and explained my predicament. That's so lame, Jake sympathized. HOAs are the worst. My cousin lives in one that fined his dad for having the wrong color mailbox. I think I have an idea, I said, but I need some help. After breakfast, I approached Dad. Can I invite some friends over to hang out in the backyard today? Sure, Dad replied, not looking up from his medical journal. Just keep the noise down. Some of the neighbors work night shifts. No problem, we're just going to play some games, maybe have some lemonade. Dad glanced up at that. Marcus. Just for us, not for sale, I assured him. Completely HOA-compliant lemonade consumption, he chuckled. All right then. By noon, Jake's mom had dropped him off, along with our friends Ethan and Tyler. Lisa from next door came over too, bringing her friend Mia. I led everyone to our backyard, which was enclosed by a privacy fence, another HOA requirement. So here's my plan, I explained, setting out my pitcher and cups on our patio table. We're going to have an invitation-only lemonade club. No sales, just donations. Like a private event on private property, Lisa nodded approvingly. Exactly. And if people happen to donate to club expenses when they get lemonade, that's just being polite, right? We made colorful flyers that read, Nelson Backyard Lemonade Club by invitation, only Sundays 12:04 p.m. donations welcome, and handed them out to friendly-looking neighbors as they passed by. By mid-afternoon, we had about 15 people in our backyard, all enjoying lemonade and the company. Mr. Murphy came, as did Bethany and her book club friends. Dad even joined us for a while, chatting with the adults while I managed the lemonade distribution. The suggested donation was $1 per cup, and most people gave more. Everything was going perfectly until about 3:30, when the gate to our backyard swung open and Patricia marched in, followed by Barbara and 2 other women I didn't recognize. This is a clear circumvention of HOA regulations, Patricia announced loudly, interrupting a conversation between Dad and Mr. Murphy. Commercial activity is commercial activity, regardless of what you call it. Dad stood up. Patricia, this is a private gathering on private property. We're not selling anything. These donations are obviously payments, Barbara interjected, holding up one of our flyers. This is just a thinly veiled attempt to circumvent the rules. I'm pretty sure you can't regulate who I invite to my backyard or what refreshments I serve, Dad replied calmly. Unless there's another section of the HOA agreement I missed. Patricia's face was getting that alarming shade of red again. This is the kind of disrespect for community standards that ruins neighborhoods. The board will be discussing this at our emergency meeting tomorrow. You're having an emergency meeting about a lemonade stand? Bethany asked incredulously. About flagrant rule violations, Patricia corrected. She turned to the gathering. I'd advise everyone to consider whether supporting this behavior is worth potential repercussions. Most of the adults looked uncomfortable, but Mr. Murphy stood up, leaning heavily on his cane. I've lived in Oakwood for 30 years, Patricia. Long before you moved in and started turning this place into a prison camp. If you're keeping a list of rule breakers, you can put me at the top." There was a moment of stunned silence, then a few people started to applaud. Patricia looked like she'd swallowed something sour, spun on her heel and left, her entourage following. "Well," Dad said after they'd gone, "that was interesting." "Are we in trouble?" I asked quietly. Dad ruffled my hair. "Don't worry about it. They can call all the emergency meetings they want. There's nothing in the HOA agreement that says you can't serve lemonade to guests in your own backyard." The next morning, Dad left early for a meeting at the hospital. I was eating breakfast when there was a knock at our door. It was Bethany, looking concerned. "Marcus, have you checked your front door yet?" I shook my head. "No, why? You might want to." She led me to the front door where a formal letter had been taped. It was printed on official Oakwood Estates HOA letterhead and stated that we were being fined $500 for repeated violations of commercial activity restrictions and creating a public nuisance. "Can they do that?" I asked, my heart sinking. Bethany frowned. "They're certainly trying to." "Patricia called an emergency board meeting last night and pushed this through. But don't worry, not everyone agrees with her." "What do you mean?" "Let's just say that your lemonade club has gotten people talking." She smiled mysteriously. "Your father will be home around 6, right? Tell him to expect some visitors." Throughout the day, our doorbell kept ringing. Each time, it was another neighbor dropping off a letter of support for my lemonade stand. By late afternoon, I had a stack of over 30 notes, many from people I hadn't even met yet. When Dad got home, he was surprised by the pile of envelopes on the kitchen counter. "What's all this?" he asked, loosening his tie. I handed him the HOA fine notice first. "This came this morning." He read it, his expression darkening. $500. This is absurd." "And these came afterward," I said, pushing the stack of support letters toward him. "All day long." Dad started reading through them, his eyebrows rising higher with each one. "Marcus, do you realize what's happening here? These people are standing up for you." Before he could say more, the doorbell rang again. This time it wasn't just one person, it was a group of at least 15 neighbors standing on our porch and spilling onto the front lawn. Bethany was at the front with Mr. Murphy, Lisa, and her parents. "Sorry to barge in like this, Doctor Nelson," Bethany said, "but we wanted to talk to you about the HOA situation." Dad invited everyone in, and soon our living room was packed. People were introducing themselves, expressing outrage at the fine, and sharing their own stories of run-ins with Patricia and the HOA board. "She fined me $150 because my garbage can was visible from the street on garbage day," a man named Tom said. "I got a warning because my Christmas lights were still up on January 2nd, added a woman named Carla. "She measured my grass with a ruler," Mr. Murphy grumbled. "Said it was a 1/4 inch too high." Bethany called for everyone's attention. "We're not just here to complain. We're here because we want to do something about it. Patricia and her cronies have been running this HOA like a dictatorship for years, and Marcus's lemonade stand was the last straw." "What can we do?" Dad asked. "They seem to have the rule book on their side." "Actually," said a man who introduced himself as Martin, a local attorney, "I've reviewed your HOA agreement. There's nothing in there that specifically prohibits children's lemonade stands. They're stretching the commercial activity clause beyond its reasonable interpretation. And more importantly," Bethany added, "the HOA board is elected. The annual meeting is in 3 weeks. If we get enough homeowners to show up, we can vote them out." "But Patricia has been president for 8 years, Mr. Murphy pointed out. "Most people don't even attend the annual meetings." "That's why we're starting a petition," Bethany explained. She pulled out a stack of papers. "We're calling for an emergency election to replace the current board. If we get signatures from more than 50% of homeowners, The bylaws require them to hold one. Dad looked thoughtful. You're doing all this because of a lemonade stand. No, Bethany replied firmly. We're doing this because your son's lemonade stand reminded us that this is supposed to be a community, not a compound. And because $500 is an outrageous fine for serving drinks in your backyard. By the end of the evening, they had organized a door-to-door campaign to collect signatures. Dad was hesitant at first, worried about creating tension with our new neighbors, but after reading more of the support letters, he agreed that something needed to change. Just promise me one thing, he said to me after everyone had left. No more lemonade sales or clubs until this is resolved. I don't want to give them any more ammunition. I reluctantly agreed, though I couldn't help feeling that my simple lemonade stand had sparked something much bigger than I'd intended. Over the next 2 weeks, the petition gained momentum. Neighbors I'd never met stopped Dad and me on the street to express support. Lisa and her friends helped spread the word on social media, creating a neighborhood group called Free the Lemonade that quickly gained hundreds of followers. Patricia wasn't taking this lying down. She and her allies on the board sent out a community-wide email warning about anarchists trying to undermine property values and the slippery slope of unregulated activities. They scheduled additional community standards inspections and began issuing warnings for minor infractions like having a basketball hoop visible from the street or flower pots that weren't in approved colors. One evening, Bethany came over with an update. We've got signatures from 48% of homeowners, she reported excitedly. Just a few more and we can force the emergency election. That's amazing, Dad said. I had no idea so many people were unhappy with the current board. Most people were too intimidated to speak up before, Bethany explained. Patricia is persistent when she thinks rules are being broken. Has she always been this way? I asked. Mr. Murphy, who had come along with Bethany, nodded. Years ago, she was just a regular neighbor. Then her husband left, her kids grew up and moved away, and somehow the HOA became her whole life. The more control she got, the more she wanted. That's actually kind of sad, I said, feeling a twinge of sympathy despite everything. Maybe, Mr. Murphy agreed. But it doesn't give her the right to make everyone else miserable. The next day, I was shooting baskets in the driveway when Patricia's white SUV pulled up. I froze, wondering if basketball was somehow against HOA rules too. But when Patricia got out, she didn't immediately start lecturing me. Instead, she stood awkwardly by her car for a moment. Is your father home? She finally asked. He's at work, I replied warily. She nodded, then surprised me by saying, You know, my son used to have a lemonade stand when he was about your age. I didn't know how to respond to this unexpected revelation. Really? Yes. Before we moved to Oakwood, he saved up enough to buy a bicycle. For a moment, her face softened and she almost looked like a different person. Then the stern expression returned. I came to inform you and your father that the board is willing to waive the fine if you agree to discontinue any commercial activities and publicly acknowledge that the HOA rules were being enforced appropriately. I blinked. You want me to say you were right to shut down my lemonade stand? I want you to understand that rules exist for everyone's benefit, she corrected, and to call off this petition nonsense. I can't do that, I said. The petition wasn't even my idea and lots of people signed it. Patricia's lips tightened. Then the fine stands. And I should warn you that continued defiance will only make things worse for your family here. She got back in her SUV and drove away. When Dad came home, I told him about Patricia's visit. Sounds like they're getting nervous about the petition, he remarked, looking troubled. But I don't like that she approached you when I wasn't home. That's inappropriate. The next morning, We woke to find our front yard had been flagged with dozens of small yellow markers, each with a violation notice. Grass exceeds 2.5 inches. Unapproved plant species. Decorative rocks not to code. Dad took photos of all the flags, then methodically removed them. "This is harassment," he muttered. "They're targeting us specifically." He wasn't the only one who thought so. By mid-afternoon, our supporters had learned about the flags and were outraged. Bethany organized an emergency meeting at her house. "Patricia's gone too far," she declared to the gathered neighbors. "This isn't about enforcing rules anymore, it's about intimidation." Martin, the attorney, nodded grimly. "We have enough documentation now to show a pattern of selective enforcement and potential harassment. That could be grounds for legal action against the board members personally, not just the HOA." "I don't want to sue anyone," Dad interjected. "I just want my son to be able to have a normal childhood without fear of arbitrary fines." "The petition now has 58% of homeowners," Bethany announced. "We've officially triggered the emergency election provision. They have to hold a vote within 30 days. Patricia and her board allies responded by scheduling the vote for a Wednesday morning at 10 a.m., a time when most residents would be at work and unable to attend. "Another tactic to suppress participation," Martin observed when he heard about the timing. "But we anticipated this." He pulled out a stack of proxy forms. "Anyone who can't attend can designate someone else to vote on their behalf." The proxy campaign was a massive success. By the evening before the vote, our group had collected proxies from nearly 70% of homeowners, many with specific instructions to vote for the reform candidates Bethany had helped recruit, including my dad, who had reluctantly agreed to run for a board position. The morning of the vote, Dad took off work, and I asked to skip school to attend. He hesitated, but eventually agreed it was an educational experience in civic engagement. The meeting room at the community clubhouse was packed. Patricia looked shocked when she saw the turnout and visibly dismayed by the stack of proxy forms Martin presented. "These need to be verified," she objected. "Of course," Martin agreed smoothly. "That's why I took the liberty of having them notarized, all 342 of them." The election proceeded despite Patricia's increasingly desperate attempts to find procedural issues. When the votes were counted, it wasn't even close. The entire existing board was voted out, replaced by Bethany as president, Martin as vice president, Mr. Murphy as treasurer, and my dad as secretary. Patricia stood up before the results were even officially announced. "This is a coup," she declared, her voice shaking. "You'll regret this when property values plummet because of unenforced standards." Bethany approached her calmly. "No one's saying we don't need rules, Patricia. We just need reasonable ones, reasonably enforced." "You'll see," Patricia warned, gathering her things. "Without proper oversight, this neighborhood will descend into chaos." She stormed out, followed by her few remaining supporters. In the weeks that followed, the new board got to work reviewing and revising the HOA regulations. They created a more transparent process for reporting violations, with a focus on mediation rather than immediate fines. They established a community improvement committee to channel the neighborhood's energy into positive projects. And yes, they specifically amended Section 7.3 to include an exemption for temporary youth entrepreneurial activities, including but not limited to lemonade stands. The Saturday after the new regulations were approved, I set up my lemonade stand on the front lawn again. Business was brisk, with neighbors stopping by not just for drinks but to chat and connect. Even Patricia eventually came by about a month after the election. She stood at the sidewalk for a long moment before approaching. "One lemonade, please," she said stiffly. I poured her a cup, trying not to show my surprise. 50 cents. She handed me $1. Keep the change. After taking a sip, she nodded. It's good. Your grandmother's recipe, I heard. Yes, madam. She looked around at the neighbors gathered on our lawn, talking and laughing together. Something like longing flickered across her face. You know, she said quietly, when I first joined the HOA board, I wanted to make this neighborhood better. Somewhere along the way, I forgot what better actually meant. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. Patricia finished her lemonade. Well, thank you. She turned to leave, then paused. By the way, my grandson is coming to visit next month. Perhaps he could help with your stand one day. He's about your age. I smiled. That would be cool. Dad, who had been watching this exchange from the porch, came over after Patricia left. That was unexpected, he remarked. Maybe she's not so bad when she's not in charge of everything, I suggested. Dad laughed. Maybe. People are complicated, Marcus. Sometimes they get so caught up in rules and control that they forget about relationships. But they can change. By the end of the summer, my lemonade stand had become something of a neighborhood institution. I expanded the menu to include cookies, baked with Dad's supervision, and set up a second table where younger kids could make friendship bracelets to sell. The HOA, under Bethany's leadership, focused on building community rather than enforcing arbitrary standards. They organized block parties, created a neighborhood garden, and established a committee to help elderly residents with home maintenance. Even Patricia found a constructive outlet for her organizational skills, volunteering to coordinate the community's first Halloween decoration contest and Christmas charity drive. One evening, as summer was winding down, Mr. Murphy stopped by our house. You know, Marcus, he said as we sat on the porch, your little lemonade stand did more than just refresh people on hot days. It reminded us all what neighborhoods are supposed to be, places where people look out for each other, not just properties to be regulated. Dad nodded. Sometimes it takes a child to point out when the emperor has no clothes. Or when the HOA has gone too far, Mr. Murphy added with a chuckle. As for me, I learned something important that summer. Standing up for what's right might not always be easy, but it's almost always worth it. And sometimes, a simple cup of lemonade can be the beginning of something much sweeter, a community finding its way back to what really matters. The following spring, Dad and I planted a lemon tree in our backyard. Patricia's grandson helped us dig the hole during his spring break visit. The tree wouldn't produce fruit for years, but that was okay. Good things take time. And every summer after that, when I set up my lemonade stand, I remembered how one small act of perseverance helped transform Oakwood Estates from a neighborhood divided by rules into a true community, united by relationships. All because I wouldn't give up on my grandmother's lemonade recipe, and because people like Bethany, Mr. Murphy, and eventually even my dad were willing to stand up and say, some traditions are worth protecting, and some rules are meant to be changed. In the end, it wasn't really about lemonade at all. It was about finding the courage to question authority when it overreaches, the wisdom to know when rules have lost their purpose, and the faith that most people, when given the chance, will choose connection over control. These were big lessons for a 12-year-old, but they've stayed with me ever since. And every time life hands me lemons, I remember that summer and think, I know exactly what to do with these.